My name is Gil Rogers. I am the host of the FYI for Your Institution podcast presented by Mongoose. I am excited to be joined today by an amazing panel, and we're going to allow them to introduce themselves. But I'm going to get through the housekeeping items. This is a special live presentation of FYI, but it will be available on the podcast shortly after the conclusion of the live panel. And we're excited to be, celebrating what I consider to be a super fun and awesome first season with me hosting the podcast anyway. And part of the program today, we're going to share and name drop some folks that are going to be joining us for season 2. But before we hopped into season 2, we wanted to bring some of our favorite people from season 1 back to share some of their perspectives. And some combination of looking at most downloaded episodes, plus people that I just like talking to and wanted to make sure we brought back on. We brought this panel together. So additional housekeeping items. Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A tools to drop questions and engage with us. We'll be watching those throughout the presentation. But how we're going to break up the live session today, we are blessed to actually have 3 guests who host their own podcasts. And so after we get through our introductions and a little bit of background, each of our panelists is gonna field a question or a topic that is on their mind, and we're gonna talk about that topic and related to higher ed, marketing, and enrollment, whatever topic they choose. And that'll be the focus of these conversations. And, Kyle sent me a note earlier today, super conversational, super relaxed, not scripted. We don't have a doc with our answers all mapped out and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to see where this goes. It's going to be, we might go sideways, and that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off and kick it to Allison to start us with our introductions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Allison Turcio. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Enrollment and Marketing at Siena College, which is a small, private, regional Catholic college just outside of Albany, New York, where it's almost 80 degrees here today, about 20 degrees higher than normal. So we're having quite a beautiful fall day here in Albany. I am host of the Application podcast on the Enrollify Network, and I'm publisher of the Higher Ed Marketers Digest, which is a bi-weekly newsletter that just takes all the great podcast episodes and newsletter articles and blog posts and puts them in one place and sends them out to you so you can scan and find the ones that are most relevant and helpful for you.
Kyle, you're up.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle Campbell. I'm the founder of Education Marketer, which is a fortnightly publication for people who work in higher education in a marketing profession. It started as a newsletter, but over the last couple of years, it's morphed into a larger insights consultancy and marketing consultancy firm. So I do marketing consultancy with different institutions, but I also produce a lot of content for education marketers. And the reason I did that was really because in our space in the UK, it used to be quite hard to come across content that you could access without having to give over your data. Or normally you'd read like a newsletter, then you get a phone call with someone trying to sell you a bunch of ads afterwards. So I tried to build something where that didn't happen. It's a bit more of a community focused space. And, a few years on, it's going quite well. And it looks like a lot of education marketers felt the same way. So looking forward to today. And thanks for inviting me on.
Hello, everybody. My name is Teege Mettille. I am so excited to be here, although for the rest of today, I will be trying to figure out if I was in Gil's group A or B of most downloaded or just he likes to talk to me. I'm not sure, but I'm thrilled to be here. I am the co-host of actually 2 podcasts, only one of which I can mention in professional circles. So I'll mention that one. It's the Admissions Director's Lunchcast. It's me and Nathan Ament, currently the Vice President of Enrollment at Knox College. We're in the midst of our 6th season, and that podcast is really focused on admissions directors and giving tangible, applicable tips and tricks to implement as early as that afternoon. So each episode, we bring one counselor, school counselor, independent counselor, community-based organization professional, and then one admissions practitioner, both interviews focusing on the same topic. So it is a lot of fun. Professionally, I am the Director of Enrollment Success at Enroll ML, an ed tech company. that is helping admissions counselors every day. You could check that out on your own if you would like.
Awesome. And so before we hop into the topics, Teege, I will address your question and I will say there's a proprietary algorithm that identified the people based on those pieces. So unfortunately, I can't share the background of what went into those calculations, but you can rest assured that you were significant enough on all channels to be part of this conversation. And so for our live audience, and I'm going to put Kyle and Teege on the spot to follow suit and put any links to resources to follow your podcast, your website, etc., into the chat so that our webinar attendees can check those out. And for our podcast listeners, these links will be in the episode notes. So as I mentioned at the opening, for people who have joined a little bit later, this special live edition of FYI for your institution, which is presented by Mongoose, is an aggregate of amazing podcast hosts in their own right. And so earlier in season 1, Allison and Kyle and Teege all joined for a variety of topics that you can download on demand anytime you like. I might ask our host, our Mongoose host in the background, to share the link to our podcast for the live listeners as well, to check out those episodes. But the point of today is to kind of bring together these minds and ideas and pick the brains of each other on topics that are on our minds. So I had sent a note to Allison and Kyle and Teege before we logged in to kind of think about what's on their mind. What are the biggest things that they're facing that are impacting their thoughts in the higher ed space specifically, barring asking Teege what his other podcast is about, which I think we'll have to find out at some point. But what's on your mind, and we'll all kind of just have a conversation about the most important things that we're facing in higher ed today. So Allison, I'm going to put you on the spot and have you bat lead off. What are you bringing to this table today that we can dissect for our listening audience?
I'm worried about the students first and foremost. I'm worried about what their experience is of finding the right college or university or program for them. There's a lot of new things emerging that make it a more complicated process, like AI, for instance, and how the ways that they might find colleges right now they're changing, and they require something more personal, perhaps, than anyone's able to provide to be able to find that right mix. And so I worry about the students because they already tell us that they're stressed and overwhelmed. Those are the words that they use when they talk about what it's like to search for a college. They already feel that way. We know that their school counselors are also stressed and overwhelmed. More and more when you talk to them, their job is shifting to more of the mental health, wellness, behavioral aspects of their job and less on college counseling. It's almost flipped a bit since the pandemic. And so they're feeling more stressed and overwhelmed, but with less support. And what role are colleges and universities playing to make this more accessible, easier, and help them find the place where they're going to thrive?
I sort of echo those concerns, and specifically on the AI angle. I read a report recently, I think it was in relation to, I think it was from Salesforce, and it looked at the power users of AI. Overwhelmingly, it's the younger generation because they use it for education, essays and stuff like that. But the stat that really killed me was around 50%, just over 50% of this sample, I think it was 10,000 young people, say that they now trust AI enough to help them make decisions. Now, I think the clear message that I've been saying on podcasts and various places where I appear, and I think I've heard you talk about it too, Allison, is that you can't trust what comes out of these things because it's not falsified, but it hallucinates. It doesn't necessarily give the right information. And now that this generation, or potentially our recruitment market, if you like, is actually trusting some of the content that comes out of that space, I think it does present quite a challenging situation for us. On the flip side of that, on the anxiety, I think there are some positive signs to be focusing in on. And I think it was in a report by RNL and Zemi recently, that highlighted not just the anxieties, but some of the things that students are looking forward to. And one of the top things they're looking forward to when they go to campus is meeting friends and engaging with real people. And I actually thought of your school, funnily enough, because you shared recently, didn't you, that you had a community marketing project going on. You're using email to help your staff feel that they're more connected with students, and students feel that they actually have a person to talk to at the institution. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, we do a lot of one-on-one connection through the admissions process to try to help them find a person that will be their person and that will help them through all of this, because they need the help, and it's not going down. I thought that this was a ramp up from the pandemic, but it's not coming down. That's what they're saying. And the friendship and the belonging, the desire for that is escalating, if anything. And I think when you think about the students who are now at the tail end of high school, who are starting to consider colleges, when we're talking about traditionally aged students, of course, when you think about when the pandemic hit for them, 8th grade, freshman year, just when you're starting to hit a stride, find some friend groups, hit that confidence. So they might feel that more than any of the groups have yet we keep waiting for it to kind of go down and not be something. But then when you think about how they search for colleges, and we have this very one-dimensional aspect a lot of ways, major, location, size, urban, suburban, but how does that help the students find their people? How does that help them find the experience on the campus that they're actually going to thrive in? So that's one of my worries, is there's this disconnect between the tools we have to help them match to colleges and what they really need to understand about colleges to find the right place for them.
One of the things that strikes me with that, Allison, is students are expecting and are fully comfortable with the level of almost intrusiveness with their data from colleges, far more than colleges are comfortable with. And I think it's a generational shift. Things we can do on the college end, as far as mining student data, is personally so offensive to me. I hate it. I love that we can do it, but I hate that companies do it to me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But this rising generation, of course, millions of students, thousands of exceptions, kind of expect us to be monitoring their data footprint and reacting to it, right? So they expect when they stop opening emails that we stop calling them, right? Or the inverse is true, that we ramp up our engagement as they start engaging with us. But I think for the Gen X-ish generation that is often in leadership roles right now, and again, exceptions everywhere, I think at least for me, I'll speak for me, my instinct is back off, leave them alone, don't get too creepy. But if we could find a way to blend those two perspectives, we could all serve students better. They're sending this is what we see at Enroll ML when we do our data science project. They are sending the signals of interest and engagement in a way that we can and do measure. We just aren't acting on it enough. So, you mentioned that they're looking at, we're reaching out by location and major, maybe GPA. But the second students enter our applicant cycle, those segments don't matter to the students. They don't think of themselves as a typical high school age student in Appleton, Wisconsin, who's interested in cello. They resort by their interest level, and colleges can do better by students by reading those signals.
I think this is like a tale as old as time part of this, though. Like if we think about, we've been talking about personalizing content forever, right? And it's the cliche term of dear first name isn't personalization. We know that, and everyone accepts that, but we always run into the issue of, well, then what level of personalization is personalization, and how do we ensure that we are reacting to student behavior in an appropriate way? Because there's always that big brother admission component, right? Of like, oh, I saw you were on our financial aid page. How can I help you with learning about financial aid? You don't want to go that creepy level of, hey, I'm tracking you, even though they know they're being tracked. So what's the balance here of, and what's the path, not to get overly tactical, but what's the path to ensuring that we're actually addressing those students' needs? So we've been talking about this for decades, as far as personalizing our response and personalizing our outreach.
I think we overcomplicate personalization. I think having worked in like digital teams in the past, the most dreaded phrase you could hear from like a stakeholder was, "We want to personalize the website." It's, oh my God, no, it makes me go white thinking about it. But the kind of biggest solutions have more impact isn't these sort of aspirational sites that put a pop-up to you if you're in a certain geographical location looking at a certain page and ask you to fill out your data. It's real basic stuff like actually getting an email nurture track correct according to the subject area or the topics that a student's interested to hear from you about. Miami University do this really well. I heard them on the Higher Ed Marketer podcast a few weeks back now. But they have a long running podcast, and on each episode of that podcast, a episode is given over to a major or a subject or whatever it is. And then they simply take that and they cut up that topical podcast episode for a whole stream of comms for a student who might be interested in that topic over time. And it makes the whole email process of comms instantly more personal. And it doesn't use any of the super intrusive stuff that, we have become quite familiar with. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You can do it at scale, but you have to start somewhere. So it might be in a subject and you roll it out. But yeah, that's my experience of how personalization can be done in a more sort of humanizing way.
Well, and then we can think about personal. So I think there's a difference between personal and personalization. I think you can send an email or a message to a student and you can ask them about themselves. You can ask them about what they're looking in, what they think will be the best kind of college for them. You can ask them, what else should I know about you before I read your application, your transcript, and your essay? What else do you want me to know about you? What are you most worried about when it comes to your college transition? And I didn't have to personalize anything in that, but a first name perhaps, right? But it probably feels a lot more personal to them than almost anything else that we can send. So I think that we often, and that's even more simple. So I think we go a little bit too crazy with what we can do. I agree on the personalization, but sometimes we can just be personal. And I think we can look to other industries. These are things that they are used to. They are used to Amazon. They are used to Netflix. So we need to, we don't get to set the bar. We're not the ones who get to set the bar for what they are going to experience as a consumer, right? We have to get up to that bar.
I think that, and to go back to Teege's point too about the personalization, and I think it's an area that not a lot of people talk about, or we at least should be talking about more, is personalizing the communication approach based on behavior. So it's not just a bunch of merge fields with, dear so-and-so, we saw you're interested in the biology program. You should reach out to so-and-so, right? Like that's mail merge, right? We've had that technology forever.
For a little bit of time.
Yeah. It's really, I love the concept of like really tailoring the communication cadence based on behavior and preference, right? And I think that that's something that needs to be talked about more when we talk about personalization and personalizing outreach, for sure.
It would go a long way to them feeling less overwhelmed and stressed. I mean, we need to own it on the college side. We're the ones making them feel overwhelmed and stressed. We're part of the problem.
Yep.
We need, and if we can own that and name that, then we can contribute to making this better for the students.
Yeah. And I think that's something that looking ahead with changes to the ways that students are engaging with schools, whether it be the testing services with, mobile apps, with new online applications, lead gen platforms, college search sites. There's different ways that students are engaging with institutions for the first time, which again, not new. This has been happening in different ways for the past 15 years. But that I think is an area where institutions need to start adapting, is the recognition of the different channels and different sources. Any questions or commentary from the chat we can drop in. So again, this is the live version. It'll be available on demand. But if there are questions in the chat that you want to pose to us, we'll monitor those as we go, and we'll find a spot to tie in when a question jives with the topic. Teege, you look happy.
Well, I just saw a question that came in. What are your thoughts on the U.S. tuition debt crisis? And I get, can I answer that?
Go for it. You
I
get
get
excited
so
about student loan debt?
I get so amped up about this for a couple thoughts. First and foremost, and I know this sometimes it rubs people the wrong way. We have a for-profit college debt crisis. And I like to lead with that. That was the driver. And of course, yes, that's not to minimize the impact of not-for-profit colleges and tuition and pricing and all of that. But when you look at what changed to kind of catapult the debt rates up, that's where things were. That said, even saying, oh, but for-profit or not-for-profit colleges, it's average around $34,000. It's manageable. That means it's the average. The extreme examples are still out there, and I think it is incumbent on colleges to find ways to not prevent students from taking on that level of debt, because I think it's too easy to say to not put ourselves in their shoes. There may be any number of very valid reasons they need to take an offer that we personally wouldn't take, but we need to be sure students fully comprehend what they're getting into. If I can tell just a quick anecdote about my nephew, not the brightest kid I've ever met. Just saying that.
We won't
But
share this podcast with him. It's okay.
Oh my God.
don't worry. Listen,
Poor
I've
kid.
got 11. I've got 11 nephews, so it'll be okay. But he was really excited about a particular college. It was the type of college he had the jersey since he was, in high school or, in middle school basketball player, right? And their aid package had the federal loans, the parent loans, plus individual loans from the institution. And the family was excited. They figured it out. They're like, we can afford this. And I was like, okay, here's the monthly payment. And I sent it back, and that put the brakes on, right? Just presenting it that way. And he ended up making a different choice, and he's happy where he's at. But finding ways to make sure students don't just have the technical information we're required to provide them, but that they can fully embrace and understand what they're getting into is, I think, a big part of the solution. We are way too untransparent with our financial aid packages.
As someone who operates outside of your system in a different part of the world, that's probably one of the most succinct and accessible ways I've ever heard that explained. So thank you for that.
And Allison, you posted something in the chat. I'll let you.
I just added a link. So a first start is the colleges that have signed on to the price transparency initiative. And those colleges are promising to do things like make sure that it's very simple and clear in the financial aid package what is aid and what is something that you're going to have to pay back and what are those interest rates. So we definitely have a role here on education and information. But to your point, Teege, a lot of those stories that end up in the media are the exceptions. Of course they are. They're the clickbait. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so there becomes this picture that everyone's graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that they'll never get out from under, which isn't.
And that's part of our annual admissions hype machine. You alluded to it before, right? Where there's the colleges are fueling this in some respect with the marketing messaging and the emails, and the U.S. News rankings come out, and is college cost worth it? And so there's this clockwork communication around the college search process, because the audience turns over every year, right? Like we have to do these things every year because students who are graduating and looking for colleges, and I'm speaking traditional first-time undergraduate students is what the focus of that would be, but that's what it is, right? And that's why those exception to the rule items always come up in the news, because that's part of the hype machine. I will say part of it too, for my opinion, is that there's an inputs component to this as well, right? And the inputs being how institutions are developing their aid strategies, or how they're developing their merit aid and financial aid prep planning and those sorts of things. This will be my only cheap plug of the conversation. After this live presentation, I'm hosting a webinar with our colleagues at HAI Analytics who do financial aid optimization strategies. And I think that there's a lot of big box store type approaches to this that many folks who are listening to this probably pursue. And I think there's a day of reckoning coming on how those aid strategies are developed from that cookie cutter type of an approach. So I'm going to put a link to that webinar in the chat as well, and we'll put the recording in the episode notes. But that was a good pop-up topic.
For more great conversations, advice, and actionable insights, check out the Application Podcast on the Enrollify Network.
Grow your student community, help them stay, and encourage giving with Cadence, Higher Ed's premier engagement platform from Mongoose. Designed exclusively for higher ed by higher ed professionals, Cadence helps you engage your audiences with the perfect balance of AI and personal connection. Talk to students, parents, and alumni on their time and how they want. Empower your staff with integrated text and chat inboxes that gather all conversations in one place. Reach out to learn more about how our best-in-class service, support, and integrations have helped colleges and universities like yours have smarter conversations. From text to chat, make every message count.
The next topic we're gonna transition into. Kyle, I think you have some thoughts that you're gonna bring to the table for us to talk about. So I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, my main concern at the moment is that we're reaching the end of the first era of social media. So let me ground that a little bit. So we now see a huge maturity really happening with the number of people who are joining social networks. 2023 has been the slowest growth year ever for social. I think it's grown like 2.8%, whereas in something like 2017, it grew 20%. And we're also seeing a maxing out of the amount of time that people have to spend on social networks too. In fact, if you look at GWI data, that is completely flat. Similarly to how precious this situation, the old methodologies of going viral on social media are starting to break down. If you look at recent data that's coming out of TikTok, the number of viral videos from the biggest creators has typically actually just fell off a cliff. It's plummeting. And it's the same for smaller creators as well, but not quite to the same degree. And it's because how we use social networks and digital networks really is probably a better term for them now. And how we connect with people, it has completely changed. And we're seeing young people move more towards community-based, closed circle groups, friends that they know, private spaces. And at the moment, our entire social function is still modeled out of getting content to go viral as fast as possible and reach as many people as possible. So it's a huge change we've got ahead of us. And I haven't worked out the solution, but I think what we'll need to see in a lot of content teams, social teams going forward is this much more acute awareness of audience. I think there'll be someone in institutions who needs to be responsible for audience growth for different segments, building up different content marketing programs. So if you want to effectively reach people in these channels, it's a much heavier lift over the next 10 years than it has been in the previous. And I'd love to hear from people who work in these spaces and deal with these problems, like what they think about that. So Allison, I'll go to you first. You have already spoken a little bit about your way you kind of build those personal relationships. I know that's philosophy goes a bit deeper for you, but how are you thinking about this end of an era and how you're looking to communicate with students over the next, say, 5 years a little bit differently to perhaps how colleges have done before?
So the way we're thinking about social and digital media is really about the experience of especially our current students, because we think if our current students are having a strong and transformational experience, that will lead to strong word of mouth. And it's honestly better than any ad I can ever buy or any campaign I can ever run, right? Put myself out of a job. But when we think about social media, I think it's really this transition. And you pointed it out, Kyle, by saying that people would just want us to go viral. That's ego. That's institutional driven. If we're going to be student driven and student centered and student focused, then viral is not the goal, right? So I think we're really starting to think about how are we using our social media channels to enhance the individual student's experience. So for instance, how are we leveraging our social media to make sure that they are aware of and using the appropriate support services for you, that particular student? What can we be doing? So less promotional and more connection to the right in-person oftentimes experience. So that's how we're starting to think about it. And we don't have all the answers by any means, but we're really trying to switch our thinking from what do we want to say on social media and how do we want to go viral? What do we want to be putting out there more to how is what we're doing enhancing the student's experience, their lived experience.
It's funny because I've been looking at this notion a bit deeper recently because it's a personal interest of mine, and I've noticed that some of the traditional rules used by marketers, it tends to be about the frequency. The more and more content leads to better results. And if you start to look at what scales in social feeds, it tends to be quite obvious content, which is so generic that it appeals to a great number of people, but not necessarily the right audience. So, like you said, it's very much about focusing on what works with those smaller student groups. T, what's your sort of take on this?
Yeah, my perspective, I think, is somewhat tilted based on my professional experience has always been at small liberal arts colleges where the recruitment can be pretty close to one-to-one. But, if we're dealing with a scenario of closed networks, it's less about what are we going to want to put out and more about what will students want to tell us and how will we make sure they know we can listen. So I think when blogs first came out, when email first came out, it felt like an insurmountable task to the people at the time. Like, how are we going to type a letter to each individual student? Because it didn't occur to us that we could mass mail those, right? So that we'll find a way to get into Discord servers and things like that. But I think it's going to be much more at prospective students' invitation. And that invitation is only going to go to our current students, not their admissions counselor or their admissions dean, et cetera. But I think to me, hearing you say that, Kyle, one, I celebrate the stats just as we are in the chat. And I think we may be hitting the upper limit of the amount of time people are willing or able to spend on social media. But years ago, we hit the limit on what we should be spending on social media, right? So that was long ago. But students, if they're wanting more nuanced networks, tighter networks, I'm thinking of the MySpace top 8, right? Like that type of thing. I learned from my nephew that this is a different nephew, a smarter one, that he has like a subgroup on Instagram that are just his best friends, and I'm not on that, which hurts deeply, But like they're building these
credit for Teege.
Yeah,
I don't know.
They're building these tighter networks. They're doing it because they're trying to push out the noise. So we can't offer noise. We have to offer listening, and that's going to be time intensive.
I think it's one of those. I feel like a lot of times we've been with this group anyway has been at this long enough where everything is old is new again, right? There's always been this like chasing students on the next network type of a feeling and effect, and that it used to be that there were part of the admissions hype machine was watch out, admissions officers are looking at your Facebook, make sure you clean your Facebook because you don't want to get denied. And it's like anytime I presented on that at a conference and asked the question of the group, everyone would say, ain't nobody got time for that, right? Like that was their response, just to bring up an old meme. It's there is a certain element of it's good. Like let's get back. Let's do the focus on personal connections, allow them to introduce themselves to us, allow them to tell us about themselves and invite us to the conversation, right? And I think it goes into a lot, again, just changing what I mentioned before about the way students are connecting and engaging and introducing themselves to schools is continuing to evolve. And that's going to be, not necessarily waiting for forever. It's been, we buy a bunch of names from a service and we market to those names. That's going away, and we've got to be more creative, but it's not going to be going viral on Twitter, right? Like that's just, or X, if we want to be accurate with the conversation. So
no one goes viral on Twitter now.
No one goes exactly right. And so I think there's an opportunity here to definitely continue to move the conversation into personalized outreach and personalization of content and being responsive. I think the other old adage was, we have no choice on if the conversations are happening on social media. We can just have a choice on how active we are in being a part of that conversation. And that's what Facebook was originally when colleges could start making pages, right? Was just being a facilitator of the conversation, not the screamer from the mountaintops. Because I hate to break it to you, but students never really cared about every single post we put on Facebook. They care about being responded to when they post about us on Facebook. And that's just evolved over time, and being a positive reactor to those types of interactions is a much bigger opportunity, I think, as we move forward.
We're worried about the wrong thing here. We're worried about being involved in their world on social media, when if they're going to connect with a current student way more likely than us, hooray, let's take our ego out of it. I don't need to be in that. That's ego driven kind of thinking. I don't care, talk to the current student, but then as a marketer on the campus, you need to be shouting from the rooftops that the number one opportunity is the student experience, because then I'm not worried about them connecting with the students, because I know they're having a great experience and what they're going to say. So when we're not focused on the student experience and the marketers aren't being the number one cheerleaders, that's why we're worrying about what the current student might be saying and what we're not in control of and what we might not be seeing, right? So I feel like we're worrying about the wrong thing sometimes.
That's a good mic drop on Kyle's segment.
Hi, Kyle here. If you like the FYI podcast, I have a feeling that you'll like mine too. I may be from across the pond, but if you're an education marketer, we share a lot of the same challenges. Every week on the Education Marketer podcast, I'll either have an interview with someone doing cool stuff in the higher ed marketing space, or a 5-minute peregrination on what matters in higher education marketing. Stay strong, see you there.
Discover future applicants, delight enrolled students, and amplify fundraising performance with our Cadence engagement platform's live chat and chatbot solutions. Designed exclusively for higher ed by higher ed professionals, Cadence helps you engage your audiences with the perfect balance of AI and personal connection. We leverage proactive outreach and anticipate common roadblocks, knowing the most significant decisions often start with the smallest conversations. Our powerful AI ensures instant support and is smart enough to know exactly when to hand off to a staff member. And if nobody is available, it allows for easy follow-up. Effortlessly integrated with your website, we proudly feature an industry-leading 85% self-service rate. It's never been easier to make every message count.
And we will kick it over to Teege. What do you got for us?
Oh my gosh, Gil, I am genuinely really worried about admissions counselors. So this is almost the corollary version of what Allison had mentioned. In the last year, I've been a part of 2 research projects studying kind of staff morale in admissions, and it's real problematic. I see 3 competing forces all coming together at once, and it's going to come to a head in the next couple of years. One is staff morale and everybody's relationship to work has changed drastically in the last 5 years, right? So we've got that. We have institutions have increasing need for revenue and enrollment. And then we have the demographic cliff and the search cliff. All 3 of those coming together all at once.
Just some little things, Teege.
Little things.
Minor challenges.
Yeah. And to me, the breaking point is, admissions counselors drawing a line at what colleges can expect of them, right? Like that to me is the change. Every year, you all can see this on LinkedIn. Colleges will put out in January press releases about more applications than ever before.
Yeah.
We've all seen that. I've done those. I know why we do those. But those press releases at the bottom never have a line at the bottom that says, along with this 10% increase in applications is a 10% increase in admissions counselor staffing, right? So we just every year keep larding on more applicants for each counselor to the point that they can't be expected to build relationships with each of them. So they have to spend time in spreadsheets, in queries, doing data analysis, trying to target their students. And we didn't hire people in admissions to do that. We hired effervescent, energetic, outgoing people that want to help students. So we've changed the job slowly over time. And I really believe we're now at a point where colleges need admissions counselors to have a Herculean work-life balance in order to meet enrollment goals. And it's just going to get worse. And it can't do that, right? So I think we need to find ways to help counselors sort through their applicant pool. That's one of the things I've been working on. But I see that as just a growing problem that is only going to get worse. Every college wants the demographic cliff to not apply to them, and they think it won't, right? Like that's the other key. And it's going to come on the backs of admissions counselors. And it really worries me for the next few years of the health of the profession and the professionals.
Before Allison and Kyle chime in, I want to add I'm going to pile on one more thing onto all this. And it's to that point of like the warped sense of reality that's going on. A couple months ago, Inside Higher Ed published the Chief Business Officer survey, and you can look it up. We'll put the link in the episode notes. But ultimately, the common theme was most of the respondents felt like their institution was on more solid financial footing, and the outlook for the future looked great, right? And then a couple weeks ago, aligned with the NACAC conference, the Chief Enrollment Officers or the Chief Admissions Officers report comes through, and what happens? Most of them said they haven't hit their enrollment targets by before May 1st. They've got these challenges with the enrollment cliff and the Supreme Court decision and yada, 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 yada. And it's like, so something's got to give here. The joke I made on LinkedIn, and people pigpiled on me for it because they hate when you make that comparison of sales and admissions officers. But I said that's basically the issue, right? Is like it's the disconnect between executive leadership, being the chief business officers, and the sales team, the people on the ground who actually have to bring in the revenue, right? And so I think that's another area where that's just another weight on the shoulders of this field staff, where there's this warped sense of reality at the leadership level sometimes, and how much they actually need to do to get their job done. So that's my mic drop on the foundational part. I'll kick it to you guys.
I think marketing can genuinely help with some of these issues. Sorry, is that an assumption of me? No, you're nodding. That's good. Okay. I was speaking to a university I think it was in the Netherlands recently, KDG University, and they are a small school, and they were really struggling with how to handle inquiries coming in and to retain the energy that you just mentioned. So they completely redesigned their marketing funnel, essentially, actually creating emails that were short, accessible, responded to the sort of questions that students were asking, and then added in the information students needed to know. And the results were, and I've got them here, they, make sure I get this right, they halved the number of inquiries, but they doubled the number of applications. So they didn't need to upscale or anything like that, just because they sorted out the actual lead qualification process, if you like, actually sent the right people to admissions counselors to actually have conversations with. They managed to sort out some of that bottleneck. It's still challenging. There's no kind of quick turnaround for this, but marketing can probably do more than they realize sometimes in these situations.
They totally can. Guess whose office, if you're watching the video of this, guess whose office is right here behind me on this wall? Anyone want to guess? Director of Admissions.
Yep.
So, okay, maybe you can't be physically next to each other, but how can you be metaphorically next to your Director of Admissions? I'm talking directly to the marketers here. Most of my team is trained to read applications, because we have some new marketing campaigns that have increased our applications at certain times of year. So guess what? We created the problem, right? We created the challenge. How do we help solve that? We're in it with them. You've got to work it out together, build strategies together, so stuff like that doesn't become a surprise. You got to have strategies, and you got to have systems, and you have to work hand in hand with each other to make it work and take some of that stress off. We have had only one admissions opening on a team of 9 in 3 years. And I think before that, it had been a few years before even then. So we are working as one team. And I think that's a huge reason why we have this retention that some other colleges aren't experiencing. We have to treat it that way. We're all in this together.
I love it. I love the insights. I love the conversation. And I think we're all on the same page. And hopefully this conversation helps other people, our listeners, both live and on demand. I appreciate all three of you joining and sharing your thoughts and your expertise. And I invite everyone to subscribe to all the podcasts. I think there's no shortage of good conversation across all these channels. Before we say goodbye, a couple of fun items. We said we'd be unveiling and dropping the guest list for season 2, so I'll do that in a moment. But before we do that, I was reminded by our friends at Mongoose that we have a special FYI swag pack that we are going to give to one of our live attendees. And we did a random scientific drawing, and we identified that Catherine Santana, who's one of our guests, is the winner of that swag pack. So Catherine, thank you for being here and for engaging and for being a member of our community. And we'll get you that swag pack afterwards. We'll have a member of the team reach out. And so I'm glad you said yay in the chat, by the way, because if you didn't engage after that, I would have been like, oh no, somebody walked away. All right. So, as a preview for season 2, so obviously, technically, I feel like this is the de facto first episode of season 2, and that is lovely, and that'll be okay. If you were at the 2023 NACAC conference in Baltimore and swung by booth 100, you would have seen us having on-the-spot interviews with people throughout the conference. So we have a couple of sessions, or a couple of episodes that are focused on those conversations and the themes that arose. So be ready for some in-depth conversations about the admissions community's response to the Supreme Court decision, the direct admission movement, staff morale, all these sorts of topics will be coming in the next couple of weeks. We also sat down with Jenny Ricard, who is the CEO of Common App, and she's going to be one of our premiere episodes for the season. Recently, I sat down with esteemed author Jeff Salingo, who's going to be premiering his episode in a couple of weeks. He's got a new book that he's working on. He'll be sharing some details there. Founder and CEO of Mongoose, Dave Marshall, will be joining us as the sponsor of the podcast. He gets a free seat throughout the year at some point in time. We've also got Stephanie Geyer from the University of Montana. She's been around in the industry for a very long time, marketing maven, great mind to share. Eric Hoover from the Chronicle, Paul LeBlanc from Southern New Hampshire University, and many, many more. I'm excited that just recently we reached an opportunity with Mongoose to keep this podcast going for the foreseeable future, which is lovely and amazing. And also the not foreseeable future, because it's going off for a very, very long time. So we're excited about continuing the conversations here on FYI. And we, again, are extremely grateful for everyone who joined us today. So if you don't already subscribe to the podcast, go ahead and find the link in the chat or in the episode notes for this podcast if you're listening on demand. And all of these conversations and more will be coming out over the next on a now weekly basis. I think that's the other big news, is that we're going from, because there are so many important conversations to be having in higher ed, we're going from a bi-weekly podcast to a weekly release to help meet the demand for these types of conversations. So before we say goodbye, one last cheap plug opportunity for all of our guests. We'll go in the same order as the intros. Final thoughts that you want to share, and then we will say goodbye to everyone for the day.
I just want to say that we're in this together. We're all facing a lot of the same challenges. And I really believe one of the reasons I host the application podcast, which is really, they're short episodes, really actionable and focused, is because I believe that if we make better decisions and we do a better job of marketing and we do a better job of supporting our colleagues, that we can turn this tide in higher ed that we're all facing. So subscribe to the podcast.
Guess my parting thought really is just respect your audience, people. If you do that, you'll do just fine. If you want to listen to my podcast, just search for Education Marketer Podcast in wherever you get your podcast. But it always sounds better on Apple, I'm told.
Oh, good to know.
I would encourage people, I keep a semi-regular blog with a webinar series where we're focused on a lot of the issues I was raising here. You can see that at enrollml.com. Just look for the Enrollment Insights link. And Gil, the season 2 guests sound amazing. I do feel, though, that Allison, Kyle, and I were part of the crew that helped open doors for Jenny Ricard, Eric Hoover, Jeff Salingo. So
yeah, what's up?
It makes sense.
It's us, yeah.
Pioneers. What I did not say is that I'm reserving the right to have you all back as individual guests season 2 as well. So there we go. We need
hard acts to follow.
It's a good opportunity to have consistent quality conversations. So there we are. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us again, and we look forward to seeing you next time on FYI. Bye.
Bye, everyone.